Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport, scooterwest.com. For all things Vespa, check us out on the web, scooterwest.com. We have every part and accessory you can imagine for your Vespa scooter, whether it's brand new or it's an old one. So today I'm going to show you how to do all the care and feeding that you need to know about for your Vespa GTS. And that could be any GTS, whether you have an old GT200, GTS 250, the GTV, any of the large frame Vespa, or something like this brand new 2023 Vespa GTS 300. So probably the most important thing, I'll just go right into it, is keeping up the air pressure on your tires. If you read the owner's manual that comes with a scooter, they say do it every ride. Check your tires, inspect them. I think that's just more lawyer talk. They just want to make sure that you're covering your grounds and not riding off on a flat tire. But it's pretty important, especially these scooters that have the traction control system, to keep the pressure. So the ASR system is very sensitive to the air pressure. And you could just have the basic stick air pressure gauge. You can even have a bicycle pump to pump up these tires if you're looking for the most basic setup. But by far the most popular setup is something like one of these cordless air pumps. We have these on the Scooter West web store. Pretty affordable. Tool-Air, because not only does it inflate the tires cordlessly, you could charge your phone, has a flashlight, but it also accurately reads the pressure of the tires. So another thing that's pretty important is checking your oil level regularly. And my thought on the oil level is check it frequently at first with the way you ride in your normal riding habits, and kind of just have an idea how often it might go low, so oftentimes if you're just easy on the scooter, you may not need to top out the oil in between those oil changes, which on these scooters is 6,250 miles, 10,000 kilometers. But I typically recommend just change the oil every 3,000 miles. It's the best preventive maintenance you can do. The manufacturers always like to push those oil change intervals, but these small motors work hard. They're running on just a little bit over a liter of oil, so change every 3,000 miles. But if you're riding a scooter hard on the highways, or have like the 2020 GTS, which was noted to burn oil, you may want to check the oil level more frequently. Maybe every couple gas stops, every 500 miles, that would be appropriate to get an idea of what your oil consumption is. Another thing you may need to maintain, and you should just check every once in a while, is the battery. The basic tools with the scooter are enough to get access to the battery, but if you're looking for inexpensive set of tools to get access to the battery, you have Tool 60, which is a screwdriver handle with Phillips bits, and then you have the Star or the Torx bits, it's Tool 61. They're both quite affordable and on our web store. You need those to access the battery. If you're not using your scooter weekly, I'm talking weekly in the winter all the time. If you're using it less than that, I highly recommend having a battery maintainer and charger. The Battery Tender Junior 800 selectable is a pretty nice battery charger at like a $45 price point. It works with the newer technology batteries. These scooters just use a traditional lead acid battery. And 800 milliamps is even enough to bring up a weak battery in a fairly quick charge, so to get you back on the road. It's got a nice long cord on it. Other options from Optimate and Noco, they're just as good, reputable brands of battery chargers. They're safe and they're like certified and tested, so it's not something you're gonna leave plugged in and walk away for the winter to find out this melted down or cooked your battery, or worse yet, had a fire. So kind of keep that in mind. $45, $50 is not really that much money to get something that's a good quality product that you can keep for lots of years and as needed. Maybe you use the scooter frequently, but maybe you made a mistake and left the lights on. Well, at least you have a charger to charge it. It is possible to jump start these. I'm not really going to go into it. That's kind of an emergency situation. the alternator or the stator in these scooters is not quite as strong as what you find in a car. So if you drain the battery all the way low and you need to jump start it, when you get home, I'd recommend plugging it in and do an overnight charge. All right, so it's pretty important to know what the factory rated pressure is, and obviously you can deviate from those pressures. I'll talk about that. So on this VIN plate, buried in here is 26.1 PSI for the front and 37.7 PSI for the rear. And I'll talk about my recommended pressures, but a lot of times I get those questions. You don't look at the maximum pressure that's listed on the tires. You look at the VIN plate that has the tire sizes, the vehicle weight, and the recommended pressures. So we'll move on to the front tire. I'll show you how to check that tire pressure and inspect the tire. So typically you want to do this task while the scooter is cold, before you go on a ride. Like Piaggio says every day, I would say get in a habit of doing it every 2 weeks is probably reasonable. And just be aware of the tire condition. Look at them, notice when something feels abnormal, like it feels low when you ride off, and don't keep on riding. That could be a dangerous situation. And just like oil level, you kind of want to keep tally and how much you lose, because you will lose tire pressure just because these are smaller tires. They tend to lose air through the bead, and so you thread that onto the stem there, and it's going to indicate the pressure. And it's 20 psi. It hasn't been checked in a while, and we'll do a set pressure of 26 psi. And these are pretty neat. You just push the power button and it just does its thing, and it stops right when it's at the specified pressure. So for instance, I'd check it maybe in 2 weeks. If it went down 5 psi, I wouldn't be alarmed. If the pressure was down to about 10 or 15 psi low, I'd probably take a look at my tire in more detail. So pretty easy to do. You could just, on the front, the scooter's lightweight enough where you can kind of lift it and rotate the tire. And I'd look all the way around. You look for nails, slashes, little cuts in the tread that just look abnormal. This is a brand new tire. It's got the fuzzies still on it. The tread's obviously perfect. It's perfectly kind of oval round like it should. As a tire wears, it will kind of get cupped or kind of a lumpy, especially the front tire. The rear just depends on how you ride. It might wear out the center, or you might wear out the sides. Oftentimes you have odd wear like cupping or side wear when the tire's been run underinflated too long. So you can see the tread depth, it's, I don't know, I would say a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, or 3/16 of an inch probably. The minimum tread depth should be about a 1/16 of an inch on the thinnest part. Just because you see tread in some areas, but other areas are bald, just because the front tire tends to wear more on the sides than on the center. And a good way to check to see what a 1/16 inch is put a head of a penny in there. And if the whole penny head is exposed, that's less than a 1/16 of an inch. Oftentimes front tires, if people aren't using the scooter all the time, they'll age out. They'll dry rot, the stem will start to crack, and that's enough reason for me to justify replacing a front tire. And by aging out, the tire manufacturers don't ever recommend using over a 10-year-old tire. There is a date code on this tire. It should be a 2-digit week code, and then 2 digits for the date. So if it's like says 11/22, it would be the 11th week of 2022 is when that tire is made. So that kind of is how, as a shop, I would take a look at the tire and I'd inform a customer on what the age of their tire is. A general rule of thumb is you go through 2 rears for every front on a GTS. You can get, I would say, about 12 to 18,000 miles out of front. For the rear, it's anywhere from 4 to maybe 8,000 out of a rear at the very most. It completely depends on how you ride the scooter, and also what the brand and type of tire you have. Rear tires, it's even more important that you check it while it's cold. And the recommended pressure on the nameplate is 37 PSI. I would do 37 PSI if you're, you know, a 250-pound rider or you're riding, using the scooter 2-up. If you're my weight, like under 150 pounds, I'd do something like 32. And then you can kind of interpolate in between there. So if you're a little bit heavier, maybe you like 34 pounds. It's personal preference. I won't go below 28 or 30 in the rear. 26 seems to always just work in the front. You can adjust it if you want to try different pressures by a little bit. But the rear, there's a little bit more give or take on that pressure because you can vary the weight quite a bit based on the rider and passenger and that weight that's over that rear tire. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and check the oil. If you read the owner's manual, they recommend checking the oil every ride. And that's quite ridiculous considering how difficult it is to do. My recommendation, if it's a new scooter, maybe check it every 250 miles. And if you don't see oil loss, I would just start extending it maybe then to 500 miles and then maybe check it every 1,000. I probably wouldn't go more than 1,000. And then at 3,000 miles, just change the oil. That's my recommendation. So you want to make sure it's all cool. If this muffler is hot, it's completely scalding hot in here. The other thing to keep in mind is the oil level will read higher when it's warm. So the dipstick's kind of right next to the snail right here. And you gotta get your whole hand up in there. Make sure it's on the center stand on a level surface. So you unthread the dipstick from this cover right here and pull it straight out. And there's kind of some obstructions like the fuel tank and stuff right there, but it is possible to pull it straight out. So you pull the dipstick out, you can see that the operating range is, I would say about 1/4 inch up the tip and then up to about 3/4 inch from the tip. So there's this crosshatch, and that's the normal operating range for the oil level. And the way you drop the oil dipstick back in to check it is you kind of got to feel your way around. You got to get that the tip of the dipstick. It's pretty fragile, right? And there's a center spot it will drop right in there. There's a couple other spots it will want to drop into, but it likely wants to eat the tip. And it's not unheard of to break the dipstick off in these motors. Not going to hurt anything, but you're going to need a new dipstick. So even I'm having trouble kind of finding the right spot, and then it drops right in. So kind of when it just drops right in, you have no force, you're not shifting it side to side. Go ahead and thread that dipstick back in, and almost to where the O-ring of that dipstick bottoms out, and then go ahead and unthread this. You can see why you do not want to do this while it's hot. And then you could check the oil level. So it's right there in the crosshatch. The only reason you need to top it off if it comes out dry like this. And if it's dry like this, I'd add about 200 cc's and it should bring it pretty close to the maximum mark. So not much oil. It's pretty difficult to top off. We have a specialized funnel that works in this little area. Another option is use a large syringe if you only need to add about 200 cc's. I have separate oil change videos that kind of talk about putting a bulk amount of oil into this fill hole on the side. But I'll admit, the early 2019 earlier is much easier with the dipstick on the belt cover on the left side. A very, very popular option for these newer GTS is a replacement oil pan that has a clear sight glass to check the oil level. So you can just walk by it and visually check the oil level really quickly. As long as the oil level is right in the middle of that little sight glass, you're good to go. And my recommendations for the coolant level is check it every 3,000 miles or 1 year. Again, you want to do this when the engine's cold. You're going to need a T25 Torex or star bit. And on the right side, there's this knee pad cover, I like to call it. Take the single screw out and then fold this cover back. And you can see opaque coolant reservoir. There is a cap on it. It's pretty hard to get off by hand. You could put a needle nose on there, but an easy way to check the oil level is to shine a light through it. And this does need a little top off, I could tell. So if you shine a light through it, you can see there's a minimum mark, which is where the coolant is at, which is still safe, and the maximum mark. You don't want to go above the maximum mark because you're likely to have coolant boil over when it expands when it's hot. And once it's at the minimum mark, you could top it off. And if I'll probably top it off. And what I find is there's a lot of soft junctions, you know, hose junctions, 2 radiators on these. They do tend just to weep a small amount of coolant, so they do need to be topped off, you know, about every 3,000 miles. In the center, here is your battery cover, or the center mat, and occasionally you do need to service the battery. It only has a limited lifespan, being a lead acid technology battery. And the typical lifespan of a battery on these scooters is anywhere from a year to even as long as 8 years. And it mostly depends on how you use the scooter. The batteries that last about 8 years are my customers that ride their scooters every single day. Maybe they do 20 miles, so that's enough to keep the battery always charged every single day. Batteries only get a year of use as somebody that only put 100 miles on their scooter in the whole year, and there's been spans of 6 months where they didn't even touch the scooter, so the state of charge of that battery dropped right off. And sometimes the quality of the battery also makes a difference, and every once in a while they just fail. That's what I've found too. They internally fail. Either have an open cell, and an indication of an open cell is you have enough energy to turn the dashboard on, but there's not even a lick of energy to even attempt to crank the scooter over. Or a battery is just weak or on its way out, will just crank slowly, or sometimes you'll hear like kind of a chattering buzz noise from the starter relay, kind of indicating that there's not enough current to crank over the starter. Because the ultimate demand on this battery is only when you're starting the scooter. Other than that, it's like kind of like a buffer for energy, you know, when you have the ignition off, and kind of smooths out the power. And it's pretty important that stays in place. And it's also pretty important that you occasionally check these terminals. You know, see how that one's a little on the loose side? It's a good reason just to go in here and crank these, because I get a lot of customers will tow a scooter and all it is battery terminals, or maybe they have some corrosion or oxide on them, and that could cause an issue. But having the terminals tight, kind of the metal screw will kind of bite into the metal, so it will make for a good conductivity. But that could cause a lot of issues, and you could technically have a perfectly good battery. Obviously, to test a battery, you need to remove it and check it with a load tester and a capacity tester, something that most do-it-yourselfers don't have, but a shop could do that for you, or even like an AutoZone kind of auto parts store may have a tester that's compatible with a motorcycle battery. But with a simple voltmeter, you can get an idea of the health. And right now it's standing at about 12.3, so it's kind of at the lower end of the range. A fully charged battery is fresh off a charger, might show 13 volts with the ignition off. A weak battery would be 12 volts or lower. 12.8 is generally referred to as about 100% charge. 12.3, it's probably got about a 20 or 30% charge, so it needs an overnight charge. And the reason being is I was demoing the scooter, had the headlight on, or if the scooter's just sitting, it may go weak. You can see an extra set of ring terminals on here. So we've added a battery tender lead. This is a standard SAE connector with the 2 ring terminals that go on both the negative and the positive having the fuse holder. And we typically route that battery tender underneath the floorboard, and this is where you could plug the battery tender charger in there. And these battery tender type maintainer chargers are completely automatic, so they shut off when it's at the maximum float voltage for the battery, so they're completely safe. I'm gonna leave this scooter on overnight to charge that battery. If you need to replace the battery, it's pretty do-it-yourself friendly. You're gonna need the T30 Torx driver to remove these 2 screws for the strap. Pretty important you keep the strap. I see a lot of scooters come in without the tray and without the strap. Somebody just threw them away. Pretty important, you can see this battery doesn't move around. If the battery moves around, it can degrade the battery and will loosen up the battery terminals in short order, or even worse, it may touch something metal in here and make a short. You can see they're pretty large size battery wires that kind of need to route. If you drop the battery in the right direction, the negative lines up with the black and the positive lines up just fine with the red. And they're a little difficult to get out, so sometimes you may want to use pliers, and you could pick the battery up from the terminals, just one terminal, not both, because you'd essentially be shorting the battery out. You pull it out. The YTX12BS is the OEM battery that fits most years of the GTS. Early ones, they've had a couple different variations. If you make a mistake and jump start it reverse, it's gonna blow the main fuse. I think that's a 30 amp fuse that's located in this little bracket right here. So if the scooter doesn't start at all, even after a new battery, you may wanna check that fuse. So in addition to the engine oil and the coolant, there's actually fluid in 2 more spots on the scooter. There's brake fluid, and there's also a gearbox oil. But generally, there's no reason to check those. Those are sealed systems, and the only reason you check them is if they had a leak or you're servicing those systems, such as replacing the brake pads, flushing the brake fluid, or just changing the gearbox oil. Not much reason to really check them, as long as they're at the correct level. When you do the change, that's the most important part. And same with the brakes. They have hydraulic disc brakes on both the front and the rear. No adjustment is needed. Occasionally, if the scooter's parked outside, I may spray a small amount of lubricant into the levers. But more important than keeping the pivot points lubricated is keeping the bike detailed and clean. And putting wax on the metal parts and the bright work, and just generally washing the scooter. Here in San Diego, we're a coastal environment, and the sea air, especially if you're close to the coast, will just start attacking everything from something like the chrome finish on the mirrors, the braking components, and ultimately parts of the electrical system, which can get very costly to repair. These scooters will hold up for a very long time with proper detailing and cosmetic maintenance. A lot of people think you just wash a scooter just to keep it clean, but there's more to it. You know, waxing puts a protective coating, whether you're waxing the painted bodywork. Ironically, the paint holds up better than anything else. It's an automotive finish. You can leave it parked outdoors for 10 years and you won't have any issues. Items like the seats, the metal finish parts, rubber, the plastics, those will tend to want to deteriorate the most if you leave the scooter exposed to the elements outside, whether it's the sun, the seawater, rain. If you do have to park it outside, I'd recommend a good quality cover. But again, leaving outside still somewhat exposed to the elements, or if you ride it in inclement weather or in areas where they salt the roads, that's about the worst thing you can do. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking to keep it looking nice and retain the most resale value of the scooter, or just keep it for a very long time, you know, doing everything from just a basic wipe down detail every couple weeks to every 3 months doing a full detail by waxing all the chrome bits and spraying silicone spray on the braking components and metal parts underneath the engine. It's just going to prolong everything, keep everything coated, and you're not going to end up with corrosion starting to attack a lot of the parts on the scooter. All right, the bonus section. So I'm almost done. You've been listening to me for probably 40 minutes at this point. A lot of people ask me about noises that the Vespa GTS makes. So first and foremost, the drilled rotors on both the front and the rear braking systems of these scooters, they do make some noises when you're acting on them, and that's the brake pads catching the drilled holes. It kind of makes like kind of a whirling, like noise that's rhythmic with the road speed when you're acting on the brakes. And it's a very normal noise that you'll hear. What sometimes isn't very normal, but isn't an indication of worn brakes, especially with the rear brakes on the GTS, is they tend to want to squeal, especially when they're cool. And my recommendation is just act on the brakes a couple times, and once you warm them up, usually you won't have a squeal. If they still squeal, you could use compressed air and blow the brake caliper out. It's all accessible with where you could blow the dust out. If it's still squealing after that, you may need to replace the shims on the brake caliper. There's actually a little metal tang that keeps pressure, and in extreme measures, you may need to just replace the whole caliper. They're actually pretty affordable. Recently, I've replaced a couple in our service department just because they had a lot of corrosion and looked ugly. They're not that expensive to replace the brake calipers. So that's something to keep in mind with the braking system. When the engine's operating, the most alarming noise that most people are concerned with is the noise of the cooling fan coming on. If you're riding in a cool climate, you may never hear the cooling fan come on, or if you're always moving, the cooling fan won't come on. But if you're out on a 90-degree day in just slow traffic, you're gonna hear that cooling fan come on and off. If you're out on a hot day, stopped at a train track for about 5 minutes, that cooling fan may just continuously run for that whole entire 5 minutes. So nothing to be alarmed about. As long as the coolant temperature isn't in the red, or you don't see coolant leaking, actively leaking out of the radiator cap, you're just fine. The cooling system is doing what it's supposed to do. Another noise that people complain about is when you shut the scooter off, you hear the creaking of the exhaust components, like making crackle, like a metallic crackle noise. That's because all those metal parts and the header is expanded, and as it cools down, it shrinks and it kind of makes a metallic crackle noise. Another thing that's exposed to heat when you're operating the scooter is the fuel tank, and the fuel tank will build up pressure as it heats up, and when you shut the scooter off, you may hear, which I would refer to as like a flatulence or a belch noise occasionally, and there's a valve on the vapor emission system that makes a little noise whenever it relieves pressure, kind of like how a human does. So nothing to be alarmed about. As a scooter ages, you may hear more rattles out of the bodywork, and same with the transmission. Several of the dry parts of the transmission, being the clutch, the variator, and even the belt and all that, will sometimes make some racket and slapping noise. The nice thing is the newest versions of the GTSs, they have 2 belt covers, so they really isolate that noise. But it doesn't necessarily indicate those parts in the transmission are at the end of their life. They just happen to get noisier as the age progresses and the mileage accumulates. And eventually they do need replacement once they have issues with performance, or they just make so much rattle, such as the clutch backplate will rattle so much that we'll replace the clutch before the clutch shoes are actually worn out, just to quiet up the transmission. Pretty inexpensive part. So thanks for hanging in there and watching my nice long podcast style video. Hope you found that useful. Whether you own one of these scooters, hopefully you learned something new from what I just talked about. Maybe you're looking to buy one. Now you kind of have an idea of what you're looking for. Pretty much two-wheelers in general always need more maintenance than a car. A car, you could put gas in it for 10,000 miles and it will be no issues. An electric car is even worse than that. You can go like 30,000 miles with just plugging in. That's all you ever do. So with gasoline-powered scooters and motorcycles, especially motorcycles, they need regular maintenance. The tires have a limited lifespan. They need regular routine services, such as on this model, the first service comes at around 625 miles, and thereafter it's every 6,250 miles or 10,000 kilometers. And I'd recommend an oil change in between. So we'll see you on the next one. Robot here for Vespa Motorsport in San Diego, California. If you're here in San Diego, stop by our store on Pacific Highway. If you're anywhere else in the world, check out our web store, scooterwest.com. We have everything you can imagine for your Vespa scooter, whether it's a new or old one, in stock, ready to ship same day.